if you're too quick to market and you try to, sort of take your shot before the market's ready, that's in some ways worse. It's more heartbreaking than being too late to the market.
Welcome to UpTech Report. This is our Applied Tech series. UpTech Report is sponsored by Terraleap. Learn how to leverage the power of video at terraleap.io. Today, I'm excited to be joined by my guest, Kendall Clark, who's based in the DC area, specifically Arlington, Virginia, and he's the CEO and founder at Stardog. Welcome. Good to have you on, Kendall.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
Now, Stardog is an enterprise data fabric platform. On your site, you actually state, data fabric is the future of data integration. Help me understand, Kendall, what was the problem you initially saw and set out to solve with Stardog?
Sure. So we like to say Stardog, the data fabric platform, is the only platform that lets large enterprises query and connect to their data, no matter where it is, on-prem or in the cloud, without moving or copying that data first. And that leads, in some sense to the value proposition, which is to lower time to insight and lower time to value by being data-driven and making data-driven decisions. And so the underlying problem that we're trying to address in the platform is the idea of data silos. So the sort of natural native state of enterprise data is to be very disconnected and fragmented. And that's an impediment to analytics and AI and machine learning. And in fact, it's a big impediment to digital transformation in large enterprises. And so the focus of our platform is to connect that data in a very agile, flexible, and timely manner so that businesses can use their data to drive profit, efficiency, savings, and to be more competitive.
One of the things we had talked about earlier is just kind of a bigger concept here, that the quantity of data that is being created every day is only increasing. I think it's the number you gave me before was like 30 zettabytes every year, or 2.5 quintillion bytes per day. And it's only going to grow. And so like the performance across networks isn't going to keep up with that, but how we integrate and use the data or get access to it has to change. Help me understand, like, is that correct? Am I on the right point here?
Yeah, that's exactly right. From a slightly technical point of view, the underlying idea behind data integration technology, really all of it, and this is the underlying idea behind data integration technology, really all of it, and this is a pretty stable idea for the last 50 years, is to physically move or copy data between different systems in order to integrate that data. That's what we do in a data warehouse. It aggregates lots of data and then provides analytic services on that data. You consider like something like Snowflake. You move your data into Snowflake physically, and then Snowflake as a query answering system acts upon the data in Snowflake. But as you say, there's just too much data. Data volumes are nowhere near any kind of limit of growth. And network performance is relevant here because when you're moving and copying data, you're of course doing it over networks. So a data volume curve that's ever growing and a flat data network performance curve don't really go together. So our approach is to solve this problem, address this problem by removing the requirement that the data be copied or moved in order to be queried. So we play the data where it lays, as it were.
It's like the solution up to this point is, we have data over here, let's just copy it. Let's bring it over here. And now we need it over here. Keep duplicating. But the point is, you don't want any migrations, no rippling, no replacing, no copying, just the term you use, a fabric. Is that a new term, right? I don't think anyone else is using that term.
Well, it's not unique to us. And when you said earlier, data fabric is the future of data management, that's actually the title of a Gartner analyst piece that came out in December. So we're agreeing with them, of course, because
you're seeing the trend. You're like, yes, I agree.
That's exactly right. People say nice things about you. The general thing to do is to agree with them, of course. But it's not a term that's unique to us. It's a term that's been used at various times in the history of data management to mean different things. What it really means now, and the focus in the marketplace now, is on data fabric as a means or a technique of doing data integration. And again, the key point here for us is to do that data integration in a new way without, as you said, requiring the moving or copying of data. And the point really to be made here for the audience to understand, it's not as if the moving and copying of data doesn't work. It does work, but it's slow, it's inefficient, and it also tends to cause other problems in the enterprise when you're like, at some point people throw up their hands, everybody who's worked at a big company, and said, which one of these many copies of this data source should we trust? Like, and then you get the notion of reference data and gold data and master data. And that's because we've made so many copies, we've sort of confused ourselves at the enterprise level about what's the good stuff.
For a CIO or chief digital officer at an enterprise, I mean, this is not an uncommon problem or challenge that they've been facing. It's just this data across everywhere. Moving forward, I mean, being able to use your type of solution, help me understand, how does it work? Like the underlying technology, and to make a better solution than what they've been using.
Sure. So it's a great question. We focus on, I talk about querying and connecting the data. So and querying for us means querying and searching the data. They both happen in the Stardog platform. So the underlying idea is to have a different kind of data model. We use this, what's called a semantic graph data model. So a graph data model is different from the traditional relational data model, and then it's much simpler, and it's much more powerful to represent every kind of data. And in fact, when you think about it, when people naturally go to the whiteboard in an IT context and maybe do a little data management, a little data modeling, they naturally draw circles to represent things, and they draw lines between the circles to represent connections between those things. And what they're doing, the intuitive natural thing, is to draw a graph data model of some problem that they're trying to solve. So Stardog uses that same technique directly to model the data. And then we add to that this mapping capability, which is really a way to just say, you know, when a query happens at Stardog, when the query comes from some application or some user, we're going to turn some remote data into the graph and query it as if it were always inside of Stardog. But we're actually just going to do that at query time, just at the last second, so that we don't actually have to move or copy the data until we actually need it, and we only move enough data to answer a particular question. So it's a completely different approach to the physically bulk move or copy all of the data into a place and query it there. It's, in fact, in some ways, the exact opposite approach.
Do you have any simple stories or analogies to help see this in action?
Yeah, so that's a great question. This, you know, and when bringing a new capability to market, that's the secret sauce, getting that picture in people's heads that everybody can understand. The way I like to talk about it is Stardog is a data fabric platform, but that primarily means that we answer queries. Just like a database is a system that answers queries against using some data, right? But databases, traditional or conventional databases, combine the idea of query answering with storing the data. They do both of those things. They store the data and they answer queries with the data that they've stored. So the mental picture for us is Stardog is like a database without any storage, right? It's just the query answering part. So it's able to reach out and query other systems where the data really lives, again, without moving or copying it. And so in that sense, it acts almost like a database without storage. And for people who are in the IT business, I think that may be a new idea, but it's relatively straightforward. So we're querying data that we're not storing.
It's a place that effectively knows where everything it is, but it's not storing itself. It just has the knowledge.
That's right. That's exactly right. So in this graph I talk about with the circles representing entities and lines between the circles representing relationships between those entities, we extend that model with some circles and lines that represent almost like promissory notes. Like I remember Wimpy saying, I will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today, right? So effectively the system says, you know, at some point in the future, when you need this data to answer this query, you will be able to go get it in this other system. And all that happens automatically.
Your whole solution is just to basically underlies then the other apps or solutions or analytics that they can build, the actual enterprise builds off of.
That's exactly right. That's the other point of like the fabric metaphor, the data fabric metaphor. So, you know, like I'll give you a silly analogy. You're throwing a dinner party for friends and you pull out your table extension because, you know, you want to set a buffet maybe. And the table underlying is maybe a little messed up, chipped, old or whatever. Put a nice put a tablecloth over it, right? And suddenly it's this homogeneous, you know, you can't see what's underneath it. And like, that's the idea. So we want to put the data fabric over the data sources. And then as you say, above that, like or on top of the fabric, you get applications, reporting, machine learning, AI, what we would call the business application layer.
Now, help me understand, like, are you able to keep that updated? Like, what if something moves or changes? How does the fabric adapt?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and there's an analogy I like here as well that helps understand this. Like when you're trying to manage forestry, when you're trying to manage a forest fire, we cut these things called fire breaks, right? So we cut pathways through a forest so that the forest itself is not one continuous flammable thing, right? But we cut these channels through it, and that contains the fire to particular sections, and then you can sort of fight the fire at the fire breaks. So we think about the data fabric in some ways as a kind of a fire break for the enterprise, where underneath the data fabric, that's where you do change management. As you say, changes still occur, but now in this what technical folks will call a loosely coupled architecture, the business layer, reporting and AI and compliance, and the application layer isn't directly connected to the layer underneath that changes. And so that lets you manage those changes in a way that's opaque or hidden to the application layer. And it's that opaqueness or hiddenness that, again, is the point of the fabric. You can't really see what's underneath it, but you can sit on top of it, right? You can rely on it. So you're right, things still change. But one of the benefits of a data fabric approach at the enterprise level is you're able to manage change in a more rational, coherent way. It's just easier because now instead of having to take account of those changes in many places, you can maybe take account of those changes in only one place in the fabric itself.
Again, help me understand, what are they doing right now? Like what would a CIO or chief digital officer be using or not using that makes maybe is it a major shift, or is it just a small incremental move forward that makes a big impact?
Yeah, it's actually both. Like at the underlying level of how we think about it, like the architecture, it is a big shift. It's a different way to manage data. But the point of the fabric is we, as you said, don't require any rip and replace. It's actually all of our big customers, and we're really focused on the enterprise, so on large customers, large organizations, they all incrementally adopt and implement the data fabric one use case at a time, which is really just to say a few data silos at a time. So the approach here is to be incrementally implementable and sort of slide the fabric in between the storage and the application layer slowly over time, because really that's the only realistic way to halt and turn directions in a big ship, is slowly, one step at a time, because these enterprises, they're large and powerful, they're not necessarily agile.
So it's not something that they have to suddenly shut everything down forever until they make this giant shift, that it can be a slow change into using the fabric.
That's exactly right. And in fact, some of the interest that we're starting to see in the market recently is around using the data fabric to enable cloud migrations. So you're looking at all of your data assets, thousands of data assets at the enterprise level, you're a CIO, and you have maybe 60% that are on-prem and 40% that are already in the cloud. And you're identifying in an ongoing fashion operational efficiencies that are available by shifting more data assets from on-prem to the cloud. Now that process itself is a change process that has to be managed, and you have to do that without having any outage or downtime or business interruption, right? So one of the things we've been talking with the market about recently is using the data fabric as a kind of, for lack of a better word, a pontoon bridge, a temporary structure to get you over the migration, right? Because again, it gives this kind of decoupling effect. And it's that decoupling effect that lets the change underneath be managed rationally without having so much interruption, or ideally any interruption to the business above.
Now, your platform is specifically for enterprise, just because of the scale and complexity of the data. Obviously, if they're smaller, they could just figure it out and do it themselves. But is there any particular industries or segments that you're focused on within enterprise, or just overall?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as the market matures, there will be opportunities for the SMB market, small, medium business market. I'm struck by the statistic I read recently that 85% of all businesses, irregardless of size, are have data assets in more than one cloud. So this is a problem for smaller business, but as you say, our focus is on the large enterprises. And within that focus, we definitely we have particular concentration in financial services, where we're doing a lot of work with banks and operational risk management. Second, pharmaceutical life sciences industry, where we do a lot of drug discovery. Our customers are using the data fabric platform for drug discovery. And then third in supply chain or manufacturing, where we're focused on digital twin supply chain management use case. So there's definitely focus, but in each of those cases, what they share is an underlying business challenge where the answer to some critical or strategic business problem, the data that answers that problem exists in many different places and they're disconnected. So the thing that all of those have in common from our point of view is, again, this idea of a connected enterprise using the data fabric.
What if you're kind of looking at the space overall and where it's headed? You already gave a few mentions of it. What do you see coming up that you think other CIOs and chief digital officers should be aware of in this space?
There's definitely a lot of attention on this topic. I think on this idea of taking a new approach to data management strategy. So I think one thing that's happened recently that's very interesting is people had sort of taken the view that data management was kind of a solved problem. And I've mentioned Snowflake before, and look, it makes sense. It was a quiet space for a long time, but then you see Snowflake come along and be just a crushing financial and commercial success, innovating in a space that we all more or less assumed was quiet and sort of finished. Like data warehouses were like, they were what they were, right? And then they come along and move all that to the cloud and see huge, benefit for their customers and shareholders by doing that. So I think one of the things that I'm excited about is this growing awareness, largely, I think, fueled by pandemic, that data management strategy is strategic to the enterprise, not just to its IT function, but it's strategic and central to the idea of digital and data transformation. And everybody understands that that's key to being competitive for large companies. So, the key to them not being disrupted by small startups is to really monetize and drive efficiencies and innovation with their data. And to do that, you really need to take a fresh look at data management strategy. And as a data management practitioner, I'm excited by that turn of events, right?
For you, this wasn't hey, let's build this whole thing in a year. You've been working on this for a while. What can you share of just this experience that you've been on, and maybe even some of the difficulties you've had over the past several years that you've been able to overcome in building Stardog?
Yeah, so I'll say two things super quickly. I think the first thing from a personal point, from my perspective as a person, is I like to say that patience is the most underrated virtue of an entrepreneur, right? Because the stereotype is everybody's got to be like Elon Musk and very hard charging, and it has to be done tomorrow. And like, in some situations, that's the right posture, right? And in fact, I think the data fabric opportunity is such that I'm starting to adopt more of that posture. But if you're too quick to market and you try to sort of take your shot before the market's ready, that's in some ways worse. It's more heartbreaking than being too late to the market in some ways. So I do think patience is a hard virtue to learn, but it's an important lesson for other startup folks who may be listening to this. Then the other thing I'll say quickly is we have to be strategically nimble and keep our minds open. Like my co-founders and I have been working on the underlying technology for some time, but that doesn't mean we've gotten everything right. And this is an infrastructure play, and infrastructure plays are typically headless it's a back office capability. So there's not necessarily user experience. But we had to acknowledge a couple of years ago that we needed to build a user experience layer in the platform because the world had changed. And even headless technologies now really require a user experience so that business users can really interact with the platform and feel some sense of ownership. And so that was a lesson, it was a kind of a tough lesson to learn. I didn't want to build that part of it. But at some point you have to realize, look, stubbornness is a fine line between grittiness and stubbornness. And you need to make sure that, you're on the right side of it.
I'm seeing this growing trend of software built on top of software built on top of software. It's like this whole nother existence of a whole revolution, kind of like industrialization. Everyone started to specialize. Do you see that also as a trend?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if we just remember the lessons we all learned in macroeconomics 101 in college, right? Like specialization and then hyper specialization. This is the engine of modern economic growth. This is how our society works. And it's definitely happening in the IT space and even in the data management space, right? So for instance, we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years, a real sort of Cambrian explosion of different types of databases. This was called the NoSQL movement, which did it, remember, it wasn't like no to SQL, it was not only SQL. It's, other data types need data management systems that are specialized or customized. So now we have time series databases, we have graph databases, we have a lot of different kinds of databases where 15 years ago, we really only had SQL relational databases. So yeah, we see specialization all up and down. I think the economy, particularly in IT, I think that's a good thing. It's a sign of progress. It's a mark of civilization. So we're excited to play our part in that.
Looking ahead from here, on your own roadmap, what can you share of what you see, where you see the company in the next 2, 3, 5 years from now?
Sure. So from the point of view of product, we're really focused, as I said before, on user experience, making the data fabric like literally visible, being able to interact with it, explore it like inside the data. We have, as I mentioned, one of our key use cases this year of focus is drug discovery. Drug discovery is like literally the scientific method at work, like pharmaceutical researchers, as we're all very sensitive to these days, mRNA vaccine therapies are changing the world and giving us, society back. And the ability for our customers to sort of get in and inhabit and kind of roam around and know the data in that sort of unstructured browsing way that leads to insight and, those sort of eureka moments. That's a big focus for us. And then as well, going forward, we're really paying a lot of attention to and investing heavily in automation in the back end. So underlying techniques around knowledge graph embeddings and machine learning to make the implementation of the data fabric just easier and faster.
One thing we can count on is things won't stay the same. Technology will continue to develop and grow, and in some ways get more complex, hence the specialization. But I'm just curious for you personally, what kind of upcoming technology are you most excited about?
Well, not to be a homer, I'm super excited about data management strategy, but I'll give you something a little bit outside my space that I think is adjacent to us. There's a bunch of really interesting groundbreaking work, recently, some of it coming out of IBM, some of it coming out of research community around notions of homomorphic encryption and differential privacy. So these are algorithmic techniques that allow companies like ours or cloud-based data management companies to physically possess and operate on the data of our customers while that data at all times is still encrypted. So this is a big step forward in making the cloud a safe environment to be for even regulated industries or very sensitive data. And so I think, well, it's kind of a very nerdy thing that only like math geeks would be interested in. I'm excited, and I won't come to understand it all, of course, but I'm really excited about the potential that has to sort of flatten out the differences between the cloud and other computing environments. I think that's going to be a good, exciting trend.
Well, Kendall, I really appreciate both the time and understanding more about this future of data fabric and the role that it can play in enterprise and eventually SMB. For those that want to learn more, they can go over to stardog.com. What's a good first step they can take?
There's Stardog training videos. There's lots of white papers. There's a very lovely product features overview. All sorts of fun stuff over there if you're in this business and this is intriguing.
Awesome to be able to dig into. Thank you again, Kendall, having you on the series. It's great.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it.
We'll see you all on the next episode of UpTech Report.
Have you seen a company using AI, machine learning, or other technology to transform the way we live, work, and do business? Go to uptechreport.com and let us know.